February 15th, 1982. Checkpoint Alpha 7, outside Medellin. Staff Sergeant Miguel Santos had processed 2,000 people that month. Cocaine cowboys, scared farmers, dirty politicians. But the woman in the black Mercedes was different. She handed him papers with manicured nails. Spoke perfect English, smiled like she owned the world. Miguel was tired, hungover, 22 years old and drunk on American authority, so he made her get out, made her open every bag, made her wait in the rain for 2 hours while he verified documents he could read in 30 seconds. The humiliation was deliberate, complete, personal. The woman never lost her smile. 40 years later, Miguel Santos would understand that some debts compound interest, that some women never forget, and that Griselda Blanco always collected. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The rain had turned the checkpoint into a muddy carnival of misery. Miguel watched the woman through the chain-link fence as she stood beside her Mercedes, designer dress clinging to her frame, water streaming down her face like tears she'd never shed. Her driver, a mountain of muscle in an expensive suit, kept his hands visible, smart enough to know that one wrong move would paint the checkpoint red. Sergeant Santos. Corporal Davis jogged up, clipboard in hand. Those papers check out. Colombian Ministry of Commerce. Import licenses, everything's legit. Miguel crushed his cigarette under his boot. He'd known they were clean 20 minutes ago. Hell, he'd known before he'd even opened the folder. The woman's documents were too perfect, too crisp, the kind of paperwork that came from people who could afford to make problems disappear. That's exactly why he was making her wait. Run them again, Miguel said, not taking his eyes off her. And check the vehicle registration. Sarge, Did I stutter, Davis? The corporal's jaw tightened, but he nodded. Miguel Santos was 3 weeks from rotation, and everyone knew it. 3 weeks from trading this Colombian hellscape for a cold beer and a warm bed in Jacksonville. Maybe that's why he felt so goddamn invincible. Or maybe it was the Jack Daniels he'd been sipping since 0600. Through the fence, the woman caught his eye, still smiling, still standing. Most people would be screaming by now, demanding lawyers or embassy contacts or whatever authority they thought they could leverage. Not her. She stood in that rain like she was sunbathing on a Miami beach, like time itself was her employee waiting for instructions. Sergeant Davis was back, and he looked uncomfortable. Radio chatter says we've got brass inbound. Colonel Martinez, maybe 15 minutes out. Perfect. Miguel had exactly 15 minutes to finish his little power play before the old man showed up asking why he was harassing Colombian civilians. 15 minutes to remind this woman, whoever the hell she was, that American soldiers didn't bow to foreign money or foreign beauty or foreign anything. He walked to the gate, keys jangling against his belt. The woman tracked his movement like a predator watching prey, still wearing that enigmatic smile. Up close, she was smaller than she'd seemed in the car. Maybe 5'2" in heels, mid-30s, the kind of dangerous beauty that left bodies in its wake. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to empty your purse. She tilted her head. Of course, Sergeant Santos. His name rolled off her tongue like honey over glass. May I ask why? Routine inspection. After 2 hours in the rain? Colombian time moves slower than American time, ma'am. We like to be thorough. That earned him a laugh. Soft, musical, completely inappropriate for a woman standing in a tropical downpour at a military checkpoint. She opened her purse. Hermes, Miguel noted, probably cost more than his annual salary, and began removing items with deliberate precision. Lipstick, gold compact, leather wallet thick with American hundreds, a rosary with silver beads, and finally, a photograph. Black and white, edges worn from handling. My children, she said, holding up the picture. Would you like to see? Miguel glanced at the photo despite himself. 3 young faces stared back, 2 boys and a girl, maybe 8 to 15 years old. Normal kids, innocent kids. The cognitive dissonance hit him like a slap. This woman, standing in his checkpoint, had a family, a life beyond whatever game they were playing. For a moment, his resolve wavered. Then the woman spoke again, her voice dropping to a whisper only he could hear. You have children, Sergeant Santos. The question hit wrong, too personal, too knowing. Miguel's hand instinctively moved to his sidearm, though he couldn't articulate why. Something in her tone, maybe. Something that suggested this wasn't really a question at all. That's not relevant to your inspection, ma'am. No, she agreed, slipping the photograph back into her purse. I suppose it isn't. Yet? The word hung in the air like smoke. Yet. Not never. Yet. Colonel Martinez's Humvee rounded the bend, headlights cutting through the rain. Miguel heard Davis curse under his breath behind him. The old man would have questions, and Miguel was running out of answers that didn't involve admitting he'd been fucking with a civilian because he could. You're free to go, he said abruptly, stepping back from the gate. The woman nodded as if she'd been expecting this outcome all along, as if the last 2 hours had been some kind of performance with a predetermined ending. She walked to her Mercedes with unhurried grace, her heels clicking against wet pavement like a countdown timer. Before getting in the car, she turned back one final time. Sergeant Santos, she called out, raising her voice to be heard over the rain. Thank you for the lesson. What lesson? Her smile widened, showing perfect white teeth. Respect, she said simply, and disappeared into the Mercedes. Miguel watched the taillights fade into the Colombian night, unaware that he'd just signed his own death warrant. 40 years later, the bill would finally come due. The memory always came with the taste of copper and rain. Miguel Santos jerked awake in his recliner, the phantom sound of clicking heels still echoing in his ears. The living room was dark except for the blue glow of the muted television, some late-night rerun casting shadows across the walls of his modest Coral Gables home. His hand instinctively moved to where his sidearm used to rest, muscle memory from 4 decades ago, when sleeping meant keeping one eye open in a Colombian checkpoint. The bottle of Jameson on the side table was half empty. Again. Miguel rubbed his face, feeling every one of his 58 years in the ache of his joints. The dream was always the same: rain, chain-link fence, and a woman's voice saying his name like she was reading it from a tombstone. He'd been having it more frequently lately, especially since Elena had announced her engagement. Speaking of which, he glanced at the mantel where dozens of photographs chronicled a life he'd rebuilt from scratch. Elena at 5, gap-toothed and grinning on his shoulders at Disney World. Elena at 12, accepting a science fair trophy while he beamed in the background. Elena at graduation, summa cum laude from FIU, the two of them arm in arm outside the stadium. No pictures of her mother. That wound was still too fresh, even after 6 years. The latest addition to the collection showed Elena in a flowing white gown, nestled against her fiancé in what the photographer had called an engagement preview. David Ramirez, 29, architecture degree from University of Miami, family money from import-export. Clean background check. Miguel had run it himself through his security consulting contacts. The kid seemed decent enough, even if he did have that soft look of someone who'd never missed a meal or slept on a concrete floor. Miguel's phone buzzed on the coffee table. A text from Elena, can't sleep. Wedding brain. Love you, Papa. He smiled despite the lingering unease from his dream. Elena was the only good thing he'd ever done right. Everything else, the drinking, the failed marriage, the modest security firm that barely kept the lights on, was just marking time between moments with his daughter. Try counting sheep instead of centerpieces. He typed back, love you too, mija. The response came immediately, sheep don't match the color scheme. Miguel chuckled and pushed himself out of the recliner. His left knee, courtesy of a roadside bomb in Bogotá, protested with a sharp spike of pain. He limped to the kitchen and put on coffee, even though it was past midnight. Sleep wouldn't come again tonight. It never did after the dream. The kitchen window overlooked a small backyard where Elena used to play when she was little. He'd bought this house specifically for that yard. 1 bedroom for him, 1 for her, and enough space for a swing set and a garden where they'd grown tomatoes and learned each other's rhythms. After her mother died, this kitchen had become their sanctuary. Homework at the table while he cooked dinner. Saturday mornings with pancakes and cartoons. Sunday evenings planning the week ahead. Now the yard was empty except for memories. The coffee maker gurgled to life, filling the silence with something resembling normalcy. Miguel had learned to appreciate these quiet hours when the past stayed buried and the future felt manageable. His security firm, Santos Solutions, specialized in low-key corporate work. Background checks, venue security for Miami's endless stream of galas and charity events. Nothing glamorous, but it paid the bills and kept him away from anything that required carrying a weapon. He'd sworn off violence the day Elena was born. Some promises were worth keeping. His phone buzzed again. This time it was an email from Elena's wedding planner about final security arrangements for the reception. The venue, some upscale estate in Pinecrest, wanted additional personnel for crowd control. Miguel skimmed the details, noting the guest list had swollen to nearly 300 people. David's family apparently believed in celebrating with half of Miami. The bride's family, by contrast, would be represented by Miguel and a handful of Elena's college friends she'd adopted as sisters. It should have bothered him, this lopsided gathering, but Elena seemed happy. That's all that mattered. The coffee finished brewing, filling the kitchen with rich aroma that almost masked the lingering taste of copper from his dream. Miguel poured a cup and added a generous splash of Jameson. Irish coffee at midnight, another habit his daughter would disapprove of if she knew. Through the window, a car turned down his street. Probably the Hendersons coming home from their weekly date night. Miguel watched the headlights sweep across his neighbor's driveway and disappear into their garage. Normal people living normal lives, unburdened by memories that tasted like rain and regret. He raised his cup in a mock toast to the empty kitchen. To forgetting, he whispered. But even as the words left his lips, Miguel Santos couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere in the darkness, someone was remembering everything. The peace lasted exactly 18 hours. Miguel was reviewing security protocols for Elena's wedding when his doorbell rang at 7:43 a.m. He wasn't expecting anyone. Elena was at her final dress fitting, and his few clients knew better than to show up unannounced. Through the peephole, he saw a young delivery driver holding an ornate flower arrangement that looked expensive enough to feed a family for a week. "Mr. Santos?" "Delivery for Elena Santos." Miguel signed for the flowers without thinking. White orchids and blood-red roses arranged in a crystal vase that caught the morning light like fractured diamonds. Beautiful, elegant, completely wrong for Elena's taste. She preferred simple daisies and sunflowers, things that looked happy rather than funeral perfect. The card was cream-colored stock paper, the kind that whispered old money and older grudges. Miguel's hands shook slightly as he opened it, though he couldn't say why. The handwriting was precise, feminine, each letter formed with the careful attention of someone who understood that presentation mattered. "Your father owes me respect. The debt comes due Saturday. G." The cup of coffee slipped from Miguel's other hand, shattering against the kitchen tile in a spray of ceramic and liquid. He read the note again, then a third time, his mind refusing to process the words that would change everything. His father owes me respect, not owed, owes, present tense, active threat. Miguel's legs gave out and he sank into the nearest chair, the note trembling in his grip. 40 years, 40 goddamn years since that checkpoint outside Medellin, and he'd never learned her name, never needed to. She'd been just another face in an endless parade of civilians who thought money or beauty could buy special treatment from American soldiers. But she'd known his. She'd said it like a prayer, like a promise. "Thank you for the lesson, Sergeant Santos. G." The initial hit him like a physical blow. In his consulting work, Miguel had done enough research on Colombian cartels to recognize the significance. There was only one woman from that era, that place, whose name started with G and who commanded the kind of respect that lingered for decades. Griselda. The Black Widow, the cocaine godmother, the woman who turned Miami into a battlefield in the 80s while building an empire that stretched from Medellin to Manhattan. She was supposed to be dead, deported back to Colombia, assassinated by rivals in 2012. Miguel had read the reports, felt a strange mixture of relief and disappointment that someone else had collected a debt he'd never even known he owed. But if she was dead, who had sent the flowers? Miguel's phone rang, Elena's name flashing on the screen. His finger hovered over the answer button. How do you tell your daughter that her wedding, the happiest day of her life, had just become a target? How do you explain that a moment of professional arrogance from before she was born might have painted a bullseye on her back? He let it go to voicemail. Instead, he called the florist. The shop owner, a cheerful woman named Rosa, confirmed the order had been placed by phone 3 days ago. Cash payment, delivered to the shop by a teenager who spoke perfect English with just a trace of Colombian accent. No name given beyond the initial on the card. Beautiful arrangement, Rosa said. The customer was very specific about the flowers. White orchids for reverence, red roses for remembrance. She said it was for a special occasion. Miguel hung up and stared at the arrangement like it might explode. White for reverence, red for remembrance. Someone had put considerable thought into this message, planning it with the precision of a military operation. His laptop was already open to the wedding guest list. Nearly 300 names, most of them David's extended family and business associates. Miguel had run basic background checks on the venue staff and caterers, but he'd been looking for criminal records and financial irregularities. He hadn't been looking for ghosts. Now he started digging deeper, cross-referencing names with Colombian immigration records, searching for any connection to the Blanco organization. The work was painstaking, made worse by his shaking hands and the growing certainty that he was already too late. Elena's voicemail played automatically. "Papa, the dress is perfect. 3 more days and I'll be Mrs. Ramirez. Can you believe it? I'm so happy I could burst. Love you. 3 days." Miguel closed his eyes and saw rain-soaked pavement, a woman in designer clothes, and a photograph of 3 children. Had she been planning this even then? 40 years of patience, waiting for him to have something precious enough to lose? The note lay on the table like a death sentence. "Your father owes me respect." Miguel Santos had spent 4 decades trying to forget that checkpoint, but someone else had been remembering everything. Now his daughter would pay the price for a lesson in respect that had taken 40 years to complete. He reached for the Jameson bottle with hands that hadn't stopped shaking since he'd opened that card. The Jameson burned, but not enough to wash away the taste of fear. Miguel poured another shot, then pushed the bottle aside. Drinking wouldn't solve this. Nothing would solve this, except facing a ghost he'd hoped was already buried. He tried Elena's number first, straight to voicemail. Probably still at the fitting, her phone buried in that oversized purse she carried everywhere. He left a message trying to sound normal. "Mija, call me when you get this. Just want to go over some last-minute security details." Security details. Christ. He was planning security for his daughter's wedding, while someone who remembered rain-soaked checkpoints was planning something else entirely. Next, he called Frank Morrison. Frank had worked the checkpoint rotation with him in 82 different shifts, but they'd overlapped enough that Frank might remember the woman with the perfect paperwork and the patient smile. More importantly, Frank ran a private investigation firm in Atlanta now, with access to databases Miguel's modest operation couldn't touch. The phone rang 4 times before a gravelly voice answered. "Morrison Investigations. Frank, it's Miguel Santos." Silence. Long enough that Miguel wondered if the connection had dropped. "Jesus, Miguel. Been what, 5 years? How's that daughter of yours? Getting married Saturday." "Listen, Frank, I need a favor. Remember Colombia, that checkpoint outside Medellin?" Another pause, shorter this time. "Which incident?" "We processed 1,000 civilians through that gate." October 82. Woman in a Mercedes designer clothes. I held her up in the rain for about 2 hours. Made her wait while I ran her papers multiple times. She had perfect documents, too perfect, and kids, 3 kids in a photograph. Frank's breathing changed. Miguel heard it through the phone, the subtle shift from casual conversation to something more guarded. "Miguel, why are you asking about her?" The question carried weight that made Miguel's stomach clench. "You remember her. I remember reading about her. Years later." "Jesus Christ, Miguel, you don't know?" "Know what?" "That was Griselda Blanco, the cocaine godmother. You humiliated Griselda fucking Blanco at a military checkpoint and lived to tell about it." The room tilted. Miguel gripped the edge of the kitchen table, his knuckles white against the wood. "That's impossible. She died in 2012. Assassination in Medellin. That's what the papers said." "But Miguel, listen to me very carefully. After you rotated out, things got weird around that checkpoint. Real weird." "What kind of weird?" Frank's voice dropped to nearly a whisper. "Davis. You remember Corporal Davis? He died in a car accident 6 months later. Brake failure on a mountain road. Then Sergeant Williams, the guy who replaced you, found dead in his apartment in Jacksonville. Apparent suicide, but his girlfriend said he'd been paranoid for weeks, talking about Colombian visitors who weren't there. Miguel's hand found the Jameson bottle again. Frank. I'm not finished. Lieutenant Parker, transferred to Germany, figured distance would help. Someone mailed him a package with photos of his kids playing in their school playground. He ate his service pistol 2 weeks later. That's 4 men from that checkpoint, Miguel. 4 men who all died within 18 months of that night. The kitchen was spinning. Miguel closed his eyes, but that made it worse. Why didn't you tell me? Tell you what? That a dead woman was killing soldiers? I had no proof, just coincidences and bad luck. And you disappeared, changed your name from Santos to... Wait, you kept Santos? It's Elena's name, too. From her mother. Miguel, you stupid bastard. You kept your real name. For 40 years, you kept your real name. Through the kitchen window, Miguel saw a black sedan cruise past his house, slowly, too slowly for normal traffic. The windows were tinted dark enough that he couldn't make out the driver, but he felt eyes on him like physical weight. Frank, I need everything you can find on Blanco's organization. Current status, family connections, anything that might explain how a dead woman is threatening my daughter. Give me 4 hours. And Miguel, pack a bag. If she's really alive, if she's been waiting this long, you don't want to be predictable. The line went dead. Miguel stared at his phone, then at the flower arrangement that suddenly looked less like a gift and more like a funeral spray. White orchids for reverence, red roses for remembrance. He understood now. She was honoring the dead, the men who'd already paid their debts. He was supposed to be the final payment. His hands shook as he scrolled through his contacts, looking for names of people he trusted. The list was shorter than he'd expected. 40 years of quiet living had left him isolated, dependent on routines that someone had obviously been studying. The black sedan made another pass. Miguel Santos, who'd survived 2 tours in Colombia and 20 years of raising a daughter alone, felt fear settle into his bones like winter cold. Somewhere in Miami, a ghost was keeping promises 40 years in the making, and his daughter's wedding was just the stage for the final act. The black sedan disappeared around the corner, but Miguel knew it would be back. They always came back. He'd learned that lesson in Colombia, watching coca farmers test American patrols, probing for weaknesses with the patience of predators. He moved away from the window and grabbed his laptop, fingers trembling as he opened a new browser window. Griselda Blanco family tree. The search results painted a picture that made his blood turn to ice water. Sons, nephews, grandchildren scattered across Miami like seeds from a poisonous tree. Most had died young. Bullets and betrayal were family traditions, but enough survived to carry grudges forward through generations. One name stopped his scrolling: David Eduardo Ramirez Sepulveda. The hyphenated surname was buried in a genealogy site, cross-referenced with Colombian immigration records from 1979. Miguel's vision blurred as he compared the dates. David's grandfather, Eduardo Sepulveda, had been Griselda's cousin. The family money from import-export wasn't architectural materials or coffee beans. It was cocaine. It had always been cocaine. Miguel's phone buzzed. Elena, finally calling back. He stared at her name on the screen, knowing that answering meant lying to the person he loved most in the world. Not answering meant she'd drive straight over, worried about her father who'd sounded strange in his voicemail. "Papa, you okay? You sounded weird." "I'm fine, mija. Just going over the security schedule." The lie tasted like ashes. How was the fitting? Perfect. David cried when he saw me in the dress, just a peek through the shop window. He says he can't wait to make me his wife. Her voice carried that breathless joy of a woman 3 days before her wedding, and Miguel felt something die inside his chest. The flowers you sent are gorgeous, by the way. Very elegant. Though I thought you knew I preferred simpler arrangements. Flowers? Miguel gripped the phone harder. What flowers, Elena? The ones at the venue. White orchids and red roses? The card just said, "With love, Papa." I thought it was sweet that you surprised me. The room tilted. She'd received flowers too, the same arrangement, the same message. Griselda wasn't just threatening Elena, she was marking her territory, letting Miguel know that she could reach his daughter anywhere. "Elena, I need you to listen very carefully. Don't go back to your apartment. Don't go to David's place. Come here, right now. Papa." What's wrong? You're scaring me. Miguel closed his eyes. 40 years of protecting her from his past, and it all crumbled with one phone call. There's something I need to tell you about Colombia. About why we left Miami when you were little. We left because of Mama's job. No, the word came out harsher than he'd intended. We left because of mine, because of something I did before you were born, something that's come back. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of traffic through Elena's phone. She was probably standing in some parking lot, wedding dress in her arms, trying to process her father's sudden descent into paranoia. Papa, is this about David? If you don't approve... This isn't about approval. Miguel rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. Elena, has David ever mentioned his family history? His grandfather? Eduardo? He died when David was young, some kind of accident in Colombia. Another pause. Papa, you're really frightening me now. An accident in Colombia. Miguel almost laughed at the euphemism. Eduardo Sepulveda had probably died the same way all of Griselda's relatives died, in a hail of bullets from a competing family or a government raid. The only accident was that David had survived to carry the bloodline forward. Elena, I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to trust me. Has David ever asked about my military service? Specifically about Colombia? Yes. When we first started dating. He said his family had business there in the 80s, wondered if you might have crossed paths. Elena's voice grew smaller. Papa, what aren't you telling me? Everything. 40 years of everything. Miguel heard a car door slam through the phone, then David's voice in the background. Babe, everything okay? You look pale. I'm talking to my father. He's asking strange questions about your grandfather. Let me talk to him. Miguel's finger hovered over the end call button. Every instinct screamed at him to hang up, grab Elena, and run. But there was nowhere to run from a ghost who'd been planning this for 4 decades. Nowhere to hide from family money that could buy patience and memory in equal measure. David's voice came through the phone, smooth and concerned. Mr. Santos? Elena seems upset. Is there some kind of problem with the wedding security? No problem, Miguel lied, staring at the flower arrangement that had started this nightmare. Just being overprotective. Of course. She's precious cargo. David's laugh carried just a hint of something else. Something that sounded almost like satisfaction. We'll take good care of her, sir. I promise. The line went dead, leaving Miguel alone with his ghosts and the growing certainty that his daughter's wedding had been orchestrated by a woman who understood that the deepest revenge wasn't death. It was watching someone you love walk willingly into the trap. Miguel stared at the dead phone, David's words echoing in his mind. We'll take good care of her, sir. I promise. The tone had been perfect. Concerned future son-in-law worried about his bride's emotional father. But Miguel had spent 2 decades in security work, learning to read voices the way other men read faces. That laugh, that hint of satisfaction, David had known exactly why Miguel was calling. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Elena hadn't met David by chance at that coffee shop near her office. She'd been selected, courted, seduced by someone who'd grown up hearing stories about the American soldier who'd humiliated Tia Griselda in the rain, someone who'd been raised on the gospel of delayed revenge. Miguel's hands shook as he scrolled back through his laptop browser, searching for David's social media profiles with new eyes. The photos he'd glanced at before, romantic dinners, weekend trips, Elena glowing with happiness, now looked different. Every image felt staged, calculated. David's smile never quite reached his eyes when he looked at the camera, only when he looked at Elena. The timeline made sense now. Elena had met David 18 months ago, just after Miguel's security firm had been featured in a local business journal. The article had included his full name, a photo, mention of his daughter's work as a pediatric nurse. Enough information for someone who'd been watching to finally close the circle. His phone rang again. Elena's number. Papa, what the hell is going on? David won't tell me what you two talked about, but he's acting strange. He keeps asking if you seemed upset about the wedding. Miguel closed his eyes. His daughter's voice carried the first seeds of doubt, the tone of a woman who just realized the two men she loved most were keeping secrets from her. Part of him wanted to tell her everything: the checkpoint, Griselda, the careful choreography of her romance. But another part, the father who'd spent 28 years protecting her innocence, couldn't destroy her happiness with words. Not yet. Elena, I need you to do something for me. Don't argue, just listen. Go to your Aunt Carmen's house in Orlando, tonight. Don't pack a bag, don't tell David where you're going. Just drive. I'm not going anywhere until you tell me what's happening. Papa, you're acting crazy. I know how I sound. Miguel moved to the window, checking the street. The black sedan was back, parked 3 houses down. But 28 years ago, I promised your mother I'd keep you safe. I'm keeping that promise now. Safe from what? From whom? The question hung in the air like smoke. Miguel watched a figure emerge from the sedan, tall, lean, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive even from a distance. The man lit a cigarette and leaned against the car, making no effort to hide his surveillance. The message was clear. We know where you live. We know your routines. We're not afraid of you anymore. From people I angered before you were born, Miguel said finally. People with long memories and longer reach. David's family? The question was so direct, so knowing, that Miguel felt his breath catch. What makes you ask that? Because he's been acting strange since his grandmother called yesterday. Some old woman who supposedly lives in Bogotá, but somehow knows details about our wedding that we never posted online. She knew about the venue, the date, even the flowers I'd chosen. Elena's voice grew smaller. She knew your name, Papa, your full name and rank from the army. Miguel's grip tightened on the phone. Griselda wasn't dead. She'd never been dead. The assassination in 2012 had been theater, a way to fade into the background while others carried out her final plans. She'd spent 12 years watching from the shadows as her grandnephew courted Elena Santos, waiting for the perfect moment to complete a lesson in respect that had started in the rain outside Medellin. Elena, listen to me very carefully. Do you have your car keys? Yes, but drive to the police station. Tell them you're being threatened by members of a Colombian crime family. Don't go home, don't go to David, don't trust anyone except the police. Papa, you're scaring me. I love David. We're getting married in 3 days. No, mija, you're not. The words came out harder than he'd intended, carrying the weight of a father's absolute authority. He heard Elena's sharp intake of breath, then silence that stretched like a held scream. What did you just say? Miguel closed his eyes and spoke the words that would shatter his daughter's world. David Eduardo Ramirez Sepulveda is the grandnephew of Griselda Blanco, the woman I humiliated at a military checkpoint 40 years ago. Your wedding isn't a celebration, Elena. It's a trap. The silence on the other end of the line told him everything he needed to know. Somewhere in Miami, his daughter was finally understanding that her fairy tale romance had been choreographed by a woman who understood that the cruelest revenge was hope, built carefully over 18 months, then destroyed in a single moment of truth. The silence stretched for 30 seconds that felt like hours. Miguel could hear traffic in the background, the distant hum of Miami life continuing while his daughter's world collapsed. When Elena finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. You're lying. I wish I was, mija. David loves me. He proposed with his grandmother's ring. He cries during romantic movies. He holds my hand when I have nightmares. Her voice cracked. You're telling me that was all fake? Miguel watched the man by the sedan drop his cigarette and crush it under an expensive shoe. The gesture felt deliberate, performed for his benefit. Not all of it, but the beginning, the meeting, the timing. Yes, it was orchestrated. Prove it. The demand came out sharp, desperate. Miguel understood. Elena needed facts, not her father's paranoid theories about dead drug queens and 40-year-old grudges. She needed something concrete enough to justify destroying the life she'd built with a man she loved. His grandmother called you yesterday. What exactly did she say? She wanted to know if I understood the honor of marrying into their family. She said the Blancos always remember their debts, both good and bad. Elena paused. Papa, she never said her name was Blanco. I just assumed. Because David's been training you to make that assumption for 18 months. Miguel's stomach clenched. Elena, where are you right now? David's apartment. He went to pick up his tuxedo, but another pause, longer this time. Papa, there are photographs on his dresser I've never noticed before. Old ones, a woman with 3 boys, standing in front of a Mercedes. Miguel felt the blood drain from his face. The same photograph Griselda had shown him at the checkpoint, 40 years ago. The one that had made him think she was just another privileged Colombian trying to cross military lines with her children's faces as currency. Elena, you need to leave that apartment right now. I can't. The door is locked from the outside, the deadbolt that's supposed to keep people out. Her voice rose in panic. Papa, I think it's keeping me in. The man by the sedan was walking toward Miguel's house now, his movement casual but purposeful. Miguel grabbed his service pistol from the gun safe, muscle memory taking over as he checked the clip and chambered around. Elena, is there another way out? Fire escape? Balcony? 3rd floor balcony. But Papa, there's a car in the parking lot. Black sedan with 2 men inside. They've been there since David left. Miguel's blood turned to ice. They had her. While he'd been focused on protecting Elena from David, Griselda's people had been positioning themselves around both of them like pieces on a chessboard. The conversation, the revelations, even Elena's growing doubt, it had all been anticipated. Listen to me very carefully, mija. I want you to call 911. Tell them you're being held against your will by members of a Colombian crime organization. Give them David's full name and address. Papa, what if you're wrong? What if there's some other explanation? The doorbell rang. Miguel moved to the front window and saw the man from the sedan standing on his porch, hands visible and empty, wearing the patient smile of someone who knew he held all the advantages. Behind him, the black car's engine was still running. Elena, there's someone at my door, someone who's been watching my house. Answer it. Maybe they have answers. The only answer they have is a bullet. Miguel checked the locks on his front door, then moved toward the back of the house. Elena, I need you to break that balcony door. Use a chair, use anything. Get out of that apartment. I can't just... Yes, you can. Because in about 10 minutes, David is going to come back with more than his tuxedo. He's going to come back with instructions from his grandmother about what to do with loose ends. The doorbell rang again, followed by a polite knock. A voice called through the wood, accented English, professionally courteous. Mr. Santos, we'd like to speak with you about your daughter's wedding arrangements. Miguel felt 40 years of carefully constructed civilian life crumble around him. The voice carried the same tone he'd heard in Colombian villages, when cartel representatives came to discuss territory and taxes with local officials. Reasonable, patient, absolutely certain of their authority. Papa, Elena's whisper came through the phone. I can hear them talking in the hallway, David's voice, and someone else. A woman. Miguel closed his eyes. Griselda had come to finish this personally. Break the door, Elena. Jump if you have to. Run to the police station and don't look back. What about you? Miguel looked at his service weapon, then at the back door that led to an alley he'd mapped out years ago for exactly this kind of situation. 40 years of quiet living, and it all came down to lessons he'd learned in the Colombian mountains about survival and sacrifice. I'm going to give them what they came for, mija. A conversation about respect. Whatever happened next, Elena wouldn't have to hear it. Through the front window, he watched the man on his porch check his watch with the patience of someone following a precise schedule. Behind him, the sedan's passenger door opened, and an elderly woman emerged. Even at 79, Griselda Blanco moved with the calculated grace of a predator. Her silver hair was pulled back in an elegant chignon, her black dress expensive but understated. She could have been anyone's grandmother attending Sunday Mass, except for the way the man on Miguel's porch straightened when she approached, the deference that spoke of absolute authority. She'd come to watch. Miguel moved through his house one final time, past photographs of Elena's graduations, her nursing license ceremony, birthday parties where she'd smiled with the uncomplicated joy of a woman who believed her father was exactly who he claimed to be. The back door key turned smoothly in his hand. 40 years of civilian paranoia had been good for something. The alley behind his house stretched in both directions, lined with garbage bins and chain-link fences. Miguel had walked it every morning for 15 years, noting sight lines, escape routes, the timing of his neighbors' routines. Old habits from a younger man who'd believed his war was over. He was halfway to the cross street when David's voice called from behind him. "Sergeant Santos. That's still how you prefer to be addressed, isn't it?" Miguel turned slowly. David stood at the mouth of the alley, still wearing the expensive casual clothes of a successful architect, but something fundamental had shifted in his posture. The slight awkwardness was gone, replaced by the controlled stillness of someone who'd grown up in a world where showing weakness meant dying young. "Your grandmother send you to fetch me? She thought you might run." David's smile carried no warmth now. "She wanted to give you the chance to walk back on your own. A gesture of respect." Respect. Miguel let the word hang between them. That's what this has always been about, hasn't it? Not money, not territory, just respect. You made her kneel in the mud, Sergeant. In front of her men, in front of her children. Do you remember what you said to her? Miguel did remember. The words had haunted him for 4 decades. "Next time, Senora, perhaps you'll understand that American authority isn't negotiable." He'd been 26 years old, high on his own power, determined to teach a lesson to someone he'd assumed was just another corrupt Colombian, using family connections to bypass military security. "I remember." She never forgot. Not your face, not your voice, not the way you looked at her like she was nothing. David's hand moved slightly, and Miguel saw the outline of a pistol beneath his jacket. "She had your unit commander investigated, found out about your young wife, your baby daughter in Miami. She could have had you killed then, but that would have been too simple. So she waited. She waited, and she watched, and she planned. Did you know she attended Elena's high school graduation, sat 3 rows behind you in a gray wig and glasses, watching the daughter of the man who'd humiliated her grow up safe and happy and completely unaware of the debt her father owed?" The words hit Miguel like physical blows. Griselda hadn't just found him. She'd been watching Elena for years, studying her routines, her dreams, her vulnerabilities. The coffee shop where Elena met David hadn't been random at all. 18 months, Miguel said. "You spent 18 months making my daughter love you. I didn't have to make her do anything. Elena is..." David's composure cracked slightly. "She's extraordinary, kind, brilliant, everything Abuela said she'd be." That part wasn't supposed to be difficult. Miguel caught the hesitation, the momentary softening in David's voice when he spoke Elena's name. But it was difficult. "You fell in love with her. Love is a luxury men like us can't afford, Sergeant. You should have learned that in Colombia. Men like us?" Miguel almost laughed. "You think we're the same? Aren't we? Both soldiers in someone else's war, both following orders that required us to sacrifice pieces of our souls." David's hand moved closer to his weapon. "The only difference is that I know who I'm serving." Miguel heard sirens in the distance, growing closer. Elena had gotten free, had called for help. The knowledge that she was safe gave him the courage for what came next. "The difference, son, is that I learned when to stop following orders." Miguel drew his service weapon in one fluid motion, 40 years of muscle memory overriding conscious thought. David was younger, faster, but Miguel had spent 2 decades in security work, training for the moment when his careful civilian life would crumble around him. The first shot echoed between the alley walls like thunder, followed by sirens and shouting and the sound of running feet. By the time the police arrived, Miguel Santos was sitting against a garbage bin, applying pressure to a shoulder wound, while David Ramirez Sepulveda bled out quietly in the Miami sunshine, finally free from his grandmother's careful choreography of revenge. The paramedic's hands were gentle but efficient, as she cleaned the bullet graze on Miguel's shoulder. He watched her work with the detached fascination of a man who'd just discovered he could still kill when necessary, that 40 years of careful civilian living hadn't entirely erased the soldier underneath. "You're lucky," she said. "Another inch to the left, and we'd be having a different conversation." Miguel nodded, though luck felt like the wrong word. David had been aiming for center mass when Miguel's shot found him first. The young man's final expression hadn't been anger or pain, it had been relief, the look of someone finally, free from expectations he'd never chosen. Detective Rodriguez approached with the careful neutrality of a cop who'd spent 20 years sorting through Miami's violence. Mr. Santos, we'll need your full statement, but the preliminary evidence supports self-defense. The weapon on the deceased was registered to a known associate of the Blanco organization. Griselda? Taken into custody an hour ago at your house. Amazing how cooperative she became once her grandson was dead. Rodriguez consulted his notepad. Turns out there's been a federal warrant outstanding since 2019, something about money laundering through legitimate businesses. Miguel almost smiled. Even in her 70s, Griselda couldn't resist the operational details that had made her legendary. She'd orchestrated Elena's entire romance but gotten careless with tax documentation on her real estate investments. My daughter? Safe. Shaken up, but safe. She's at the station giving her statement. Asked me to tell you she's sorry she didn't listen sooner. Elena. Miguel closed his eyes and saw her as she'd been that morning. Excited about final dress fittings, worried about centerpiece arrangements, glowing with the happiness of a woman 3 days from marrying the man she loved. By evening, she'd learned that love had been weaponized against her, that her own joy had been the ammunition in someone else's war. The paramedic finished her work and stepped back. Keep that dressing dry for 48 hours. Follow up with your doctor next week. Miguel thanked her and stood slowly, testing his range of motion. The wound would heal cleanly, leave only a small scar to join the others he'd collected over 7 decades of living. But Elena's wounds would take longer. Trust, once shattered, never quite fit back together the same way. Rodriguez walked him toward the street where police cars lined the block like a parade of flashing lights. Neighbors stood in doorways and behind curtains, watching their quiet street transform into a crime scene. Mrs. Delgado from next door caught his eye and nodded, a gesture of support from someone who'd lived through her own wars and recognized the look of a man who'd survived an unexpected battle. One more thing, Rodriguez said. The Blanco woman asked to speak with you. Said she had something that belonged to you. Miguel found Griselda in the back of a police cruiser. Her hands cuffed, but her posture still erect with the dignity of someone accustomed to command. When she saw him approaching, she smiled. Not the predatory expression he'd expected, but something almost sad. Sergeant Santos. Ma'am, I suppose you're wondering why I waited so long. Miguel leaned against the car's frame, suddenly exhausted. I figured it out. You wanted me to understand what I'd taken from you. Respect, dignity. You wanted to take something equivalent from me. Your daughter's happiness. Yes. Griselda's voice carried no regret, only the matter-of-fact tone of someone explaining a business transaction. But you should know, David did love her. That was never part of the plan. Small comfort. Perhaps. But in my experience, Sergeant, love is never small. It's the largest thing we're capable of, which is why it makes such an effective weapon. She paused. Also why its loss causes the deepest wounds. Miguel thought of Elena at the police station, probably crying as she answered questions about the man she'd planned to marry, learning details about his family that revealed their entire relationship as a carefully orchestrated deception. Will she recover? Griselda asked. She'll recover. Elena's stronger than both of us. Yes, I could see that when I watched her graduate nursing school. Such determination in her face. She has your eyes, you know, but her mother's kindness. Griselda's smile turned genuinely warm. She would have made a beautiful bride. The words hung between them like a prayer for something that could never be repaired. Miguel understood, finally, that Griselda's revenge had been perfect, not because it had caused him physical harm, but because it had forced him to destroy something precious himself. He'd had to shoot David to save Elena, but in saving her body, he'd wounded her spirit in ways that might never fully heal. The debt is paid, Griselda said quietly. Miguel watched as the police cruiser pulled away, carrying the last remnant of a 40-year-old moment of arrogance toward federal prison. The street fell quiet except for the distant sound of Miami traffic, the eternal hum of a city that absorbed violence and kept moving. Later, he would pick up Elena at the station. They would drive home together in silence, both changed by the day's revelations, both learning to live with new scars that would fade but never disappear completely. Some debts, Miguel realized, could only be paid with pieces of the soul.